All right, let's jump straight in. Jean Yves Lecastel. Now, you might be thinking, a deep dive into a French pornographic actor, really?
It's maybe not the usual topic.
Right, but hang on, because what we found is this really extensive digital footprint of his career. And it brings up some, well, pretty fascinating questions, I think, about how we track people, how you remember individuals, even in these quite niche industries.
Exactly. What does documenting a career like this across so many different online sources actually tell us?
Yeah.
About identity, about how careers change.
Yeah, professional evolution, exactly. And the sources themselves are interesting.
They really are. I mean, what do we got? There's specialized adult film databases, right?
Yep. And his IMDb Pro page, which is quite detailed.
Okay, a general movie database too. Wiki quote, even famous fics and Wikipedia entries.
So a real mix. Our mission then is to sort of pull all this together.
Synthesize it, yeah.
Yeah.
Try and get a clear, compelling picture of his professional life from all these sometimes conflicting bits of data.
Okay, so the basics. Jean Yves Lecastel, born in France, January 8th, 1965.
Got it.
Active in the pornography industry for, well, quite a while. One source says roughly 92 to 2011.
And another.
Another suggests maybe 1990 to 2008.
Okay, so a slight difference there already. Not unusual, I suppose?
No, but it's a detail. But here's where it gets really interesting, for me anyway, the aliases.
Oh, right, the pseudonyms.
So many. Joe Calzone, Jean Yves Lecastel, Jocelyn Eon.
Jocelyn Clusia, Jocelyn Vino, Marcus Mann, Yves Lecastel.
And that's just a few, right? It wasn't like one pseudonym. It was like a whole wardrobe of professional names.
Which is fascinating in itself. It's not just about privacy products.
What else?
Well, it could let him try out different personas on screen, maybe. Target different, subgenres or markets.
That makes sense, creating multiple identities within the same field.
Yeah, it shows how fluid identity can be, particularly in that line of work.
Definitely. And speaking of those identities, Joe Calzone, there's that anecdote.
Ah, yes, the Calzone story. Mario Salieri, wasn't it? On WikiQuote.
That's the one. Apparently, the name came about because Lou Castel ate 4 calzones during the filming of Sceneggiata Napoletana.
4. Salieri apparently called it absolutely indecent.
Oh. And the nickname just stuck. It's a small thing, but it kind of gives you a peek behind the curtain, doesn't it?
It does. It's a very human little moment.
Yeah.
Shows how these professional names can sometimes just happen on set in kind of unexpected ways.
Right. Okay, now let's talk scale. The sheer amount of work. One database we looked at lists 145 acting credits.
Which is already pretty substantial.
It is. But then you look at his IMDb Pro page.
And it explodes, right?
Yeah, 671 titles listed, including 583 past film and video credits. It's huge.
Wow. That's a massive difference.
And the timeline's a bit varied, too. Like we said, one source says 92 to 2011.
But IMDb Pro might have earlier stuff listed.
Exactly.
Okay, so why the big jump in numbers? 145 versus over 600?
What do you think? Different counting methods.
Probably. IMDb Pro is often more comprehensive, isn't it? It might include compilations, maybe re-releases, perhaps even uncredited bits early on.
Whereas the other databases might be stricter, focusing just on primary acting credits in, say, original films.
Exactly. Just different ways of cataloging things. It leads to these kinds of discrepancies all the time.
Makes sense. Now, to give you, the listener, an idea of the films, well, the titles are quite direct.
Often very explicit, yeah. That's the nature of the genre.
We've got things like Two Schwanze in der Foot, Army Nurses in Heat, Butt-Banged Cycle Sluts.
Anal attack, ass-mounted, look what's up my ass.
They certainly don't leave much to the imagination.
No.
And again, looking at the credits for these, his name varies. Sometimes it's Yves Castel, Jean Yves Lecastel, Jean Yves Lecastel. Lots of little variations.
Which again just underlines how tricky it can be to track someone's full filmography accurately. Were these variations intentional? Mistakes. Who knows?
Good point. But here's another layer. He wasn't just acting.
Right, he moved behind the camera too.
Significantly. Lots of credits as a director and editor, especially later in his career, it seems.
Okay, like what sort of titles?
Things like Ass Wide Open, the Private Movies series, Anal School, Harder Faster, the Ass Men series.
A Debauchery series, Private Matador series, Le Rêve de Katia. Sounds like quite a lot of directing and editing work.
It does. And we even see him credited sometimes as a writer, camera operator, or producer on some of these.
So a clear progression there, moving from performing to having more creative control.
Seems like it.
That's a pretty common path in filmmaking, really. You learn the ropes in one area that maybe you want to try directing or producing. Shows a deeper involvement over time.
And his work didn't go unnoticed either. He actually won an award,
Oh, yeah.
an AVN award, back in 2006 for Best Sex Scene in a Foreign Shot Production.
Okay, for Euro domination.
That's the one. So, tangible recognition from within the industry itself.
Yeah, that's definitely a mark of achievement,
Yeah.
being recognized by your peers like that.
So what happened after all this? Did he just stop?
Well, this is where it gets a bit unclear again, isn't it?
Right. That wiki quote entry, the one with the calzone story, Mario Salieri is quoted there saying Lecastel had retired.
And not just recently retired, but maybe 10 years prior to whenever Salieri said that.
Exactly. And that he was living in Budapest doing real estate renovation.
Which sounds like a pretty complete career change, a total shift.
It does. But then you look at his IMDb Pro page again.
And it still lists credits up to 2011.
Yeah. So there's a gap. Salieri says he retired maybe mid-2000s or even earlier, but IMDb has credits running later. How does that work?
It's a good question. Those later credits on IMDb, they might not be new acting roles.
What else could they be?
Well, like we mentioned, re-releases maybe.
Yeah.
Compilations of his older scenes packaged into new videos.
Or archive footage, using his old stuff in new productions.
Exactly. That happens a lot. So his active career might have ended earlier, like Salieri suggested, but his past work keeps appearing in credits.
Okay, that makes more sense. A sort of gradual fade out, maybe, rather than a hard stop, at least in terms of his credited appearances.
Plausible. And it would explain the discrepancy.
Looking at who he worked with, one source lists frequent collaborators. Philippe Sohn, Richard Langen, Yves Bayat, Letitia.
Typical in filmmaking, people find collaborators they work well with.
Yeah. And interestingly, it also notes other performers named Castel Catherine and Marie Pierre.
But no confirmation if they're related.
No, the sources don't specify any relationship, just notes the shared surname.
Right, so just an observation, nothing more we can say based on this info.
Exactly. But going back to those later credits, that point about archive footage is quite significant, I think.
How so?
Well, it means that even after he's apparently retired, moved countries, started a new career, his image, his past performances, they're still being used.
Yeah, they keep circulating. His presence in the industry continues, in a way.
It really highlights the longevity of recorded material in this digital age, doesn't it?
It does. The performance becomes part of a library that can be drawn on indefinitely, almost. Keeps the performer visible long after they've moved on.
Now, the IMDb Pro page itself, structure-wise, it's pretty standard for what you'd expect, right?
Yeah, you've got the credits, a bio section, probably quite brief images, videos.
A box office section, though, mostly empty, seems like.
Not surprising for this genre, maybe.
Connections, clients, though, not really applicable here, and a news section.
Which you said was pretty sparse.
Very sparse, yeah. And for industry members, there's the option to see contact info, apparently.
So it mirrors the professional setup you see for mainstream actors, just within the adult industry context. The lack of news might just mean he kept a lower public profile.
Possibly. And finally, on the community side, sites like FamousFix.
What did you find there?
Not much, really. A very little activity for him. Hardly any quotes, trivia, timeline stuff. Just mention of a single profile photo.
So not a huge fan, following, engaging on those kinds of platforms.
Doesn't seem like it, based on that source. Maybe suggests a more private approach or just a different dynamic with the audience compared to, say, mainstream stars.
Could be. Interesting.
So let's try and wrap this up. What have we learned from this deep dive?
Well, we've definitely traced a long and pretty complex career. Jean Yves Lecastel in the French adult film world.
Right. Key things that stood out. The huge number of pseudonyms.
That old Joe Calzone thing.
His move into directing and editing later on.
The AVN Award win, a mark of recognition.
And then the conflicting information about his retirement, the Budapest real estate story versus the later IMDb credits.
And the continued life of his work through archive footage, even after he seemingly stopped filming.
Which brings us to that final thought for you, the listener. What does all this documentation, this level of detail about a career in what many see as a taboo or niche industry, what does it tell us?
Yeah, about our digital age, how we record, remember, maybe even categorize people and their work.
Does having access to all this info across different databases, the professional ones, the fan sites, the anecdotes, does it change how we perceive these kinds of professions or the individuals involved?
It definitely gives you a lot to think about regarding layers of identity, online presence, and how careers are documented now.
Absolutely. It was a really unexpected set of sources, I have to say.
It was, but quite revealing in its own way. shows you can get some unique insights from digging into these seemingly very specific topics.